we went over these items. Let's go to the burger menu. This is very important. It's a lot of options here. So we're gonna go through them. We're gonna go quicker because we already what? That's a long one. We're already 30 minutes into this. Right. So let's start with the summary. Summary is it looks, it gives you the summary of your NiFi instance. And the summary, it's the process level, input ports level, output ports, remote process groups, connections, and process groups. You also here, it's you can jump into it and you can see more statistics, insufficient history. That's fine. You can also click on this arrow to go to the process, right? It tells you, hey, where is this, where I use this to debug my flow. You see here, you have run status, you have size of bytes, you have read writes, output size, and tasks, number of tasks per 5 minutes. This is important. And you can look at the statistics and you can understand what your bottlenecks are in your process. And this arrow here will take you straight to it. You know, obviously you can copy the name and say, okay, I want to go to this generate flow file. The name, again, you see that's going to bite us now. Because if I would this functionality to go to search and say, okay, take me to this processor. Yep, he's going to take me to a bunch of them because that's what we have there. He doesn't know what I'm telling him. He just looks for text. Not ideal. Give them proper names. Otherwise, when you're going to read the summary, but he's smart enough to, when we're going to click on the button, to take us to that particular component because everything in the backend is backed by unique identifiers, UUIDs, and it takes me here. And you can then play with it and tweak it and make your pipeline faster because you found where your pipeline spends most of the time. Also, here you have a filter. So let's say I want to see everything for in PG, in space PG. So not by name, obviously. We want to use it by, so again, name. Not very smart if I put this update attribute. So let's say update attribute. So he can filter out based on the name or type. When you say type, the name of the processor type. Input port is the same. You get stopped, you can pretty much the same. Output the same principle. Connections, you can see here connections. You can find what are your connections in the most you can have in the filter. You can also have by source, by name, and destination. This is really important. And process group. This is at the level. It's an aggregated bird's eye view of your process groups individually. So this is very important when you have a shitloads of flows, which is process groups, and you want to identify which ones are the slowest and which ones are the bottlenecks of your system, and that's where this view is used. Now here the bottom is not very straightforward. You have system diagnostics. So if you click on this one, we also have another entry in the menu that takes us to this, but for whatever reason, you also get it here. So you have JVM information, heap use, heap use. Like you remember, we put 1,000 something megabytes there, and now translates to 1.31 gigabytes. So that's how far he can get into memory consumption. After he tries to get over that, we're gonna get out the memory issues. Then we get this totals here. Total of max heap, how much he's using. Used, unused. I'll be honest. So this is the total memory that he claimed. This is the max memory he can claim. Out of the total memory he claimed, he's using this, and this is how much memory is free. So you can look at this and say, yeah, I'm over provision here. If this would be my standard flow, I'm over provision. I should cut this down as a starting memory and release more memory for other applications that run on the same box. Ideally, NiFi should run by itself. So now you have the garbage collection. It tells you, to be honest, there's some information here that I rarely use. The uptime of your service, it's up and running for this much time. You get the system, information. So I'm running on an 8 core. This is my core load average, the usage of my flow file repository storage. So since this is a shared storage, this is not accurate, you know, because this is how much storage I have on my local host. This is how much I'm using. So he considers that. But normally you want to have it on its own separate volume. Same thing for content repository. Same values here. Not very indicated, but this is important when you have your NiFi installed because you want to monitor this. If any of this gets filled, then you're in trouble. You don't want to. And then information about the versions. What's my Java version, operational system version? See, we're running on a Mac, and our NiFi version is 1.15.3. Cool. So that's about the system, the summary. And then we have the counters. We haven't got to the point of talking about the counters, but counters are, think about this. Let's extend this tutorial and go into counters as well, because that's important. So let's say I want to have, when you have a data profiling pipeline and you have 100 rows coming in, and then at the other side you're going through some data wrangling, you're going to explode the data, there's so much things you're going to do, and the other side you end up with a different number of rows. How do you know that it's accurate or not? Like, I'm getting 1,000 out, but I only put 100. All right, I need something to tell me that, hey man, whatever this is doing right. How can I compare before and after? So that's where I use the input, the counter. So how can I add a counter to my process? So here, a counter, it's a process. It's another process. So it's update counter, pretty much. So what we're gonna do here, the generate flow file is gonna create a success entry here, but he's always gonna create a success entry in my update counter. So if we go here and we're gonna say update counter, and let's call it in. It's only going to run on a single concurrent, and that's fine. The counter name is going to be in. That's how we're going to call it. And really important here, delta. We can use this as a value, or we can add it as a how you call it, as a attribute or parameter, passing parameter. So if this one will generate me 100, then I need to make sure that the counter will also receive the value of 100. Cool. So far so good. So we can see here relationship success, it's invalid. So what we're going to tell him, say, hey, terminate on success, meaning like when you manage to count that value in, just terminate the action. There's no downstream processor for you to pass data to. Cool. We can even, if we're smart about it, we can guarantee not clone data. We just say generate update counter and then send it downstream. So we kill 2 rabbits with 1 shot. Otherwise here there will be data cloning, we increase more stress in our system. Now there's something happening inside here, and what we're gonna do, we're gonna copy and paste this one, and on the exit we're gonna update the counter. So we're gonna have in and out number counted. So we're gonna say counter out. All right. So let's start these components. Actually, better if I zoom out a bit so you guys can see the entire pipeline. Cool. Now, if I'll start this one here, so let's start everything. So start. All right. So now we're gonna see, we're gonna have them. Let's zoom a bit in. So you see we have, how many we have here? 13. Let's stop it. In our case, we're not doing any transformation or enriching of the data or exploding or adding more rows or whatever. But what we have here, we have 16 records that landed. If we go now to the counters, we see we have all update counters. There's a global value. We have 13 interaction with counters, and we have an in and out counter. So you see 16. These values, the counter, are not persisted over restart, so you have to be mindful of that. So my use case with this one is that I have a process in the backend that goes and fetches those values every minute. And then I put them head to head, and then there's some organization that I do to actually guarantee that whatever comes in goes through logic, and it should. This is like a pretty much like a validation of a test. If I have a row coming in and there's nothing coming out, data was dropped at a point in the pipeline. So we want to avoid that, and or at least instead of being reactive, we want to be proactive about it. All right, so that's the use case of the counter. Now let's go to the next element. We have bulletin boards. Bulletin boards right now, we don't have any. Bulletin board is pretty much like error messages or warnings. Let's go ahead and create one. So let's say actually, let me generate. I know I'm going a bit faster when we talk about this because you see me clicking on the canvas, but don't get distracted with that. Let's focus on this only. So what we'll do, I'm gonna try to generate an error. So I'm gonna use an evaluate JSON path that's gonna get data from a generate flow file, right? So we're gonna configure this. I just want it to fail once. So run every 100 seconds, and then here this one is gonna do an evaluation on my, let's say, root, and he's gonna look for this particular path. Don't get distracted with this. We're gonna get into evaluate JSON, very strong processor. Now this one, it says, what do I do on relation failure, unmatch or match? Okay, I just want you to route it here. Route to failure, route to match, route to unmatch. So we have a single one. All right, cool. So now let's start this one. And let's actually generate the failures, because this one will fail. I'm giving him nothing and I'm telling him to look for roots. He's gonna generate an error. Boom. Right, we can see the error here. Obviously you get this red dot. Hey, say, hey dummy, it didn't give me a valid JSON. What do you want me to do? Cool, no problem. But now let's go to the bulletins. That's where the bulletins pop up. Oh, right, we get a bulletin message here. So you can see here that it says it's a type of error. If you click on it, it takes you to the component. And yeah, this is an image of when you have multiple flows and you get a shitloads of components that fail. This is where you're going to track. And also, when you click on the bulletins, you can see here, for example, look at the UI. You might not be able to see the UI. There's a REST API call against the bulletin endpoint. So you can consume the bulletin programmatically and understand where our error is and make sense out of it, because he gives you indicators of where it is. So you can understand which flow it's associated, which processing group or pipeline is associated with the failed component. And then you can trigger multiple alerts, interact with other teams that own that flow. Cool. So that's the bulletin there. You can obviously search through it. You can filter it by message, by name, by ID, by group ID. You can say auto refresh on, auto refresh up. You can also clear them. But if you go here again and you go on the bulletin, they're going to pop up. An interesting part about the bulletins here, they will persist for 5 minutes only. Same as this one here. So you see here, it's 12:44:54. 12:49:55. This will no longer show up here. So it's not going to be there forever, because, you know, the pipeline in NiFi, they're continuous streaming. So what's the point here to have them? Now let's go to the next one. We have data provenance. Yeah, let's go to data provenance and explain what it is. This is probably, I'm going to cut this video in two and make it 2-part video, because I think that's what? Yep, 40 minutes in. So the provenance, like we talked at the beginning, it's a repository to start with, and it's responsible for giving us indicator of the data lifecycle or my data lineage. So if we go to, you see here, you have all these components. So, you know, as a matter of fact, let's go and actually get a component that it's in the end of the line. So let's say view configuration. Let's see if you can copy this and look for this component. So let's exit this window, go to provenance, and look by component name. Might not find it by component, by type, by component name. Nope. date component name. All right, the name is not actually that, so we're gonna say no, he cannot find it. Anyway, let's take one as an example. So let's take this update or update attribute. Yeah, let's take this update attribute and let's click on it. So also you get some information here, you know, like it gives you information about the attributes that that particular step carried. But let's actually jump into this one because it's going to make more sense. So it takes us to the actual attribute. So you can see it's inside the PG, it's inside the that process group. Let's jump into it and see some other. Actually, let's go to this one. Here we can see the lineage. So if you click on this one, it gives us this UI. It's nice, but it's not, to be honest. You can click on this particular and view details at a point in time. In, for example, this was created, and you get attributes: how long the event duration was, less than a millisecond, that was created, the UUID that was allocated, the size of the content he carried with him, component ID, component name, and component type. Details, if we're going to give some description, that will show up there. No children, like there's attributes. So these are the main attributes that this particular flow file carried. You can add different processes will add different type of attributes. And the content. Right now that there's no content, we haven't put anything there. But the interesting part here is, let's say this is at the beginning of the line, the generate. So nothing was modified. You can see he showed modified attributes. So it will give you a before and after each step. So that's interesting. Now we can see here there's a component here, attributes modified. So let's view the detail. Let's see what got modified. So if you look here, we can see that pretty much nothing got modified. I don't know why he's telling us that. So nothing got modified. So at the next step, and then the data was cloned. This is another interesting part in this data provenance. You can view the details again. It gives you information about the parent flow and the child flows. That was, so a parent flow is the incoming flow, and the child flow will be the generated flow out of the parent flow, obviously. So if we go here and click right, we can expand this relation. So you see, oh, it got cloned and he got put into something else. Or we can find the parents. So it tells us, okay, this is the parent. So that's where, when you have very complex graphs, honestly, I will not use this. It's not very often I use provenance. I just look at the data flow as it is. But the provenance data can be very useful when you want to export it to another system that does data management and metadata management, such as, like in my case, I use Amundsen. So we export this data lineage and we push it into Amundsen to give us indicators of how data gets transformed and reaches the source. So that's a use case for that. Now, inside the controller settings, we get some parameters: maximum timer driven thread count. So what is, if you hover over this question mark, the maximum number of threads for timer driven processor available on the system. So if you have some processors that are set on the timer driven, then he will allocate this many threads to it, maximum. But processors that receive data and get triggered only when they receive data will not listen to this, but they will listen to the second rule, a maximum event driven thread count. So again, how many threads do I want to give to you? So this would, sometimes you install NiFi in a very fat machine, very capable, but because you're not tweaking this information, NiFi will throttle, because like you're not allocating the operational system resources accordingly. Now here we have, this is in general. Then we have reporting, task, and controller services. These are sort of processes. They're black boxes or components. So what you can do, you see you have this plus sign here. So you can go and add, there are multiples. You have 100 control services. A basic control service would be a JDBC connection. So let's say JDBC. So you can see you have a Hive connection, database, record sync. I'll go for the connection pool. So if you go here, you say, it gives you really smart. It gives you, if you want to click on this, you can click and say, let me see what's the usage. It sends you directly to the latest documentation. Or it gives information about it, the type, the version, and its status. It tells you, hey, you're invalid. And it clearly tells you why. You're missing the database connection, the driver, and anything else. You can delete it from here. You can click remove and yes. And that's the controller, or CSV reader, CSV lookup. There are multiple, you know. Again, you can go through groups, you can go through to their subgroups. So we're gonna go into reporting task controller services. We're gonna do a single tutorial on that, probably multiple because there's so many. Next, we're gonna have reporting tasks. Same principle. There are black boxes that serve particular things. So we have 15 of them. So reporting services pretty much do what the name says. They report something to something. So you can see here, monitor memory. So this is a reporting services. What this does, you know, like you can click again on the documentation and it will tell you what is it. It checks the level of Java heap available in a JVM for a particular JVM memory pool. If the amount of space configured threshold will warn. So you have to set some thresholds and then he will send this information to somewhere. So if you see here, you click here, how often should it run? And then you have properties, you know, like reporting interval, it will send. Now, verify properties. Yeah, you can click on that and verify the properties. Those are the these are the reporting tasks. Let's remove this one. Well, again, we're going to go over this in details because I think it's important when you're monitoring your flow. There's one particular one that I definitely use, which is metric reporting. You can send metrics straight to Datadog. You can send metrics to, like, for example, you can select here to Azure. You can send it like we talked about earlier. Log analytics provenance reporting task. So you can send the provenance information to an endpoint in Azure in Ops Insight by setting up here. So it's gonna constantly send data there. You can have it monitored through Azure Ops. Cool. Now reporting task, registry client. This is what we talked about. This is where you have a NiFi registry installed and then you link it to your NiFi installation through this medium here. So what you want to do, you want to do click. It's not a lot of option. It's a single one. You can give it, say, my registry, and you give it an URL, which is the registry URL, and then you give it a description. In this case, we don't have one, so this will fail either way. So cool. Right, so that's the controller settings. Parameter context. This is a thing that was introduced a couple of versions back. Really powerful when you have, for example, you have same data flows but with different. You remember we talked about that. I have something in S3 and I want to do some processing in the middle, which is the same, and then push it into, let's say you have, I get JSON data, I want to push it to Parquet but push it in another bucket. You have some attributes there that will be common in terms of their use case, but the names will be different. You're getting data in JSON for object ABC, and then you put it in Parquet in object ABCD. But I have another pipeline that has JSON in XYZ, and I want to put it into bucket Parquet WW. So this is a use case. That's where you use control. That's where you use parameter context. So in this case, parameter context is nothing than just the variable replacement values. In this parameter context, you can either do it manually, which is very tedious. So let's say just give it a name. So this is the name, the use case description, and then parameters. So parameters are key value pairs. So you're going to give it a name, parameter name, and the value. Cool. Right. So let's just keep it as it is right now. I'm going to copy this value and apply. There's some inheritance here, but inheritance means I already have an existing parameter context, and I mean, if you know programming, you know what inheritance means, and this applies to here. I want to inherit some parameters from another parameter context. We're not going to go through that. It's pretty straightforward. Let's apply this one and let's close it. And now let's go to this process group here, PG. We're going to click right on it, and he's going to give us a configure button. And here it tells us, hey, do you want me to associate to this process group any existing parameter context? And I'll say, yep, associate this parameter param context. That's how we called it. Apply. Now, nothing changed unless only this one here. How do I use the parameter context? All right. So I'll have a process group. So let's say in this case, not update counter. Let's use this update attribute. So we're going to go to the properties and we're going to add a new attribute. So my new attribute is going to be my param value. Now you can see this particular object supports expression language and parameters, and also parameter support. So the way you call these parameters is like hash, and you open this one, and I believe normally it should, all right. All you have to do is control tab, and he will give you the parameter name, parameter that we put it there as a name. So we do save, and that's it. If we apply, it will apply. And if we go back to it, if you see here, it gives us an error here. So this will take us to the parameter definition. So if you go click here, it will open the parameter context UI and will show us, yeah, this is the value. If you want to edit the value, I don't know, you want to do whatever, update the value. But let's, for the sake of this one, let's add new parameter. Let's demonstrate how we can get that. And then again, you will restart the parameter context and redeploy the parameters internally. And now here, let's see how that control space will work. So you see right now it gives us a list because we associated with that parameter context, and we have two parameters there, so we can change new and p. So I think it does it in so it has to be inside curly bracket, and then save it, and happy days. Another thing with parameter context, you cannot have more than one associated with your process groups. That's where inheritance comes in place. So let's move to the other flow file configuration history. This is pretty much like how you call it. You want to audit who's changing what. So you can see we have the user and what was the operation, the type of the component that it changed, the name, and the time. This is important when you have production, and sometimes people put their fingers in because they want to fix something without raising a change request or whatever. You know, they want to do it. They want to show service by screwing up your production environment, and that's how you check this. Again, there's a REST API in the backend that you can programmatically fetch this data out and put it into a database, or somebody changes a component in a very critical flow. Just put it in Slack, boom, just put it against the wall, and just cut that production fat finger checking. So that's the use case for this one. You can funnel it, you can do filter by ID, by user. You want to check, for example, you give access to a particular user and then he goes wild and start changing shit. You want to be able to monitor and have this one. It can be very intensive when you have a lot of changes into it, but ideally you should not have a lot of changes in production. You deploy, you happy days. If it doesn't deploy correctly, then you should not deploy. So now let's go to the next one. It's node status history. So node status history pretty much gives you information about a bunch of statistics. My God. We're not going to go over this one, but you get the idea. So it tells you if you have multiple nodes, you will get information here. It gives you status information about the Java heap. So you can see here consumption. This one here is just visual. This one you can actually manage and put it in a particular way. So if I click on it and do like a click and drag, and then I can hover and say, if you want to get more like a, I call it, a granular information about it, you can just go and say, hey, I rarely use this one, to be honest. The idea behind it is that you do have the metrics at your hand. Normally what I do, I extract this metrics and I put it into a nice monitoring tool such as Grafana or something else, and that we put alert in it, monitoring, and we have for a longer period of time. This one puts a bit of a strain on the system. So again, you have to have access to the production UI, which I don't have access. I mean, I do have access, but I tend not to do through this one. So you have all this information here. See, it gives you information about what is it and what's the use case. But don't get lost in this. It's important, but it's not critical. All right. Templates. You remember we created a template earlier on at the beginning using our template component. So here you can have here you can see the templates that you have created and information about. You can sort them, you can filter it, and you can download them locally. So you see, we just downloaded one file. So if you go here, this is an ugly XML. I rarely go through it and look at it. It's not very it's not easy to the eye. And then you get a help. Again, help, it sends you to the documentation of NiFi. And about will give you information about your version of your NiFi. Cool. So I would say that we kind of cover pretty much everything. We outside the options here. So let's go to the main. So let's make this complete since we're already 1 hour in. Let's go over these options as well. Probably I'll break this one in multiple parts. Here we talked about the this operation, and then the navigation. You see we have multiple. We can do this. So let's start with refresh. Refresh. What refresh does? Let's say you have something that will generate the fetch of metrics to bring from backend into front end, like populating these values, not as fast as. So for example, you have sometimes it's like you do a start, it takes some time. I want to do a refresh. Let's see. You see this information like 23,000. If I do refresh, oh, it's 85,000. So there is a metric in the configuration that you can set the refresh rate. But don't stress about it. It's not critical. You don't want, because the faster the refresh you want to do it, the more resources NiFi will use for this kind of silly thing to bring data in the UI instead of focusing resources on actually doing your proper ETL. So that's one. Now, the next one, it's configure. So configure will comply to the level you are here. I'm on the root. So if I'll do configure, I'm going to configure this process group, meaning the root one, because that's the default name. But if I jump into this one, so if I'll jump into this one and I'm going to go configure, now I'm configuring the information for this process group. So you have general information, the parameter content that we talked about earlier, the comments, is process group flow concurrency unbounded, meaning like it can run crazy concurrency. We're not restricting it. We can even have it to run single flow file per node or single batch per node. We can go hover over it. So only one single byte's allowed to enter the process group at a time. So that's the use case when you have, I want to process some large file. So just get in, do the work, finish the work, and then allow another one. So it handles that logic for you. And then batch per node. So like the description says, I'm not going to go over it. So right, the flow file expiration, you can set that across all processors following all created following this change. So right now 0 seconds mean like everything that it's in a queue will not expire. But if you say here put 1, what I'm telling the process group is like after 1 second of life of that particular data in the queue, try to delete it, purge it. That's a use case when you're like doing a demo and whatever lands there gets rid of it. Write it once and doesn't make sense 1 second to remove it. It would be like keep the data for, I don't know, a day and then drop it. not ideal, because keep in mind, connections, they keep data in RAM. You don't want to do that. You want the connections to constantly. The fallback pressure, how many records can be kept in the connection. The fallback pressure size, what's the size of the content of the flow files that are persist in your connection. And then you have the control services associated to that configure to that process group. So this is important because you can have different type of you have a controller that belongs to this process group, meaning like they say this process group can connect to this database, but nobody else can see this controller. Makes sense, right? So that's the definition here. Now next you have variables. Before what is it called? Before parameter context got introduced, we had variables. So variables are key value pair, pretty much, that you say, I don't know, variable one, pretty much like in programming, has the value one. And then in your flow, you can in the flow, you can use those variables. So let's say here, let's separate this one here so we can demonstrate the use of that variable on our canvas. So we're gonna generate one, and here we're gonna call this variable. So what did we call it? My var. Elephant brain. Let's see. var1. Cool. And now let's start it. Let's stop it, and let's look at the queue. So we're gonna have something into our flow right now, and if we look at it in the content, we have the value one, which we define the variable with. So variables, they have a use case, but I don't necessarily make a lot of use of them because they're strict to this particular thing. Another thing is, like, if you change process groups, so let's say, and you're gonna look at variables, you're not gonna get the variables because those variables are bounded to that process group. If I go to the main canvas and I say variables, there's no variables. But if I go back into my PG1 and I say, hey, show me the variables, yeah, okay, I have them, because they are created at the process group level, right? So keep that in mind. Now, next component here, start, stop, enable, disable. So if I would go to have not selected nothing and I say start, everything will start. So be careful with that. So you see here, everything got started, everything is red. Now if I go click right and say stop, everything will stop, right? So, but if I click on a particular individual component and have it selected and click and then go here, you see, if I click right and try to start, it does select. But if I go here and say start, only this component starts. If I click back and do stop, only this one stops. Same applies for enable and disable, right? Now we have download flow file. So when you say download flow file, it will download the state of your not Xcode. Come on, buddy. Sorry. Quit. So let's do download flow file again, and then let's look at it and open it into my VS Code. All right. It gives you a JSON representation of your flow file, of your process group. So let's move this into, change the language to make it JSON and then format it. All right. See, it's pretty big, very big. All right. So you have the flow file content. And inside the contents, you have the process groups, you have processors, you have connections, you have funnels, everything that you have into that flow. It gives you a representation. You can also for whatever reason you want to use this flow definition, normally you will create a template. And then you have, if you're on a canvas, you can have this upload template, which again has the same functionality as you dragging this on the canvas. So you say upload template, and then you're gonna look for, actually I correct myself, this upload template option is when you have a template on your local host. So let's say, for example, this my temp, I'll load this, but this will fail for sure because I already have a template. Yeah, so it says my temp already exists, so this will not. So that's the use case. And create template. Create template, it's the same when you're gonna go and click on a component and say create template. Now jumping back into this one, and we'll go to the last, empty all queues. This is a feature that is good but is bad. Sometimes people want an empty queue and they will go and say empty all queue will empty the entire queues of the entire flow. Not ideal. So if you go here and say empty all queues, it will just say, hey, you're gonna clean up everything. So if you see here, we have 771 in our system, and we're gonna say empty queues. And happy days, we're like empty the canvas. There's no data flowing. There's no. This is good because it saves you a lot of time to go through each. In the past, you had to write a loop to go through each connection and go empty them. It was a nightmare. But now this one is good when you're developing. Oh, I have 1 million thing. I don't know where it is. I don't want to go individually and clean them up. You can use that one, and that will save you a lot of time. But it's dangerous. You should not do this, or you're working with somebody else on the same UI canvas. You're gonna clean their data. So that's pretty much the initial walkthrough of the UI. Once we're gonna start developing flows, we're gonna get more custom with this information, and I think it's essential to understand. Otherwise, it's essential to know this tricks in the UI, because then later on, I think probably in 20-30 videos, we're gonna jump into how we can programmatically work with NiFi from the backend. There are some nice Python libraries that enable us to programmatically interact with NiFi, promote, view, create flows, start flows. So cool. This was a long one. I'll cut it down in multiples, so otherwise it's going to be too tiring for everybody. And by the time they get, I know normally people they say, "Oh, make it 10 minutes." Yeah, but I can't. I have to rush it. I'm already rushing to it. So I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Next time we are going to go back into geeky mode, where we're going to talk about the flow file in detail. So if I'll just jump here and just show you guys, start, stop, and this is a flow file, list queue. This is a flow file. It has a unique file name. We're gonna go over its attribute, and how you can read it, how you can use it towards developing flows and other main components into details. All right, I hope you guys enjoyed. I appreciate you watching. Give me a thumbs up, drop me a comment. It's been a long time since I've done any video tutorials, but I'm very accustomed to talking to people. I do this all the time. But in front of a camera, I don't know, it feels awkward. My voice sounds like shit when I listen to myself. I think it's common for everybody. But anyway, let's keep going with NiFi. Don't necessarily think that I'm trying to sell this tool as the best tool on the market, but definitely who's a data engineer should have it under its belt. It's constantly growing, and even so, the concepts of NiFi will help you understand. And you will see later on, I'll make some comparison between me developing something in PySpark and doing streaming or some other technology. The effort put into developing it through that way or NiFi, I can't compare it. I suffer a lot of frustration when I do project where people are getting stuck. I want to do this in PySpark streaming. I'm like, all right, cool. And then you put it down at the end of the project online that took a couple of months, that you could have done it in a week and a half. And they're like, oh, Oh, we didn't know that. All right, that's cool. You know, just pay the buck now and suffer later. Anyway, just because they don't want to use a tool that is draggy and droppy and they don't want to get geeky with it. Cool. All right. Enough about me bitching about this kind of work. I see you guys in the next tutorial. If you haven't seen the previous one and I think it's very valuable, go back and revisit the chapter 1, chapter 2. I think the intro is not relevant. I'm just talking about what we're going to do during the course. And I'll see you guys in the next one. We're going to close out. Thank you.